Good evening, everyone. Hopefully you're having a wonderful day so far. I got a good one for you today. So our favorite environment minister, Stephen Guilbeault, is back on Power Play, saying an interesting thing. He was saying that his carbon tax is very unpopular, and they're deciding to possibly scrap it. So I thought we should look into this. But first, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. And with no further ado, let's get into it.
That tariff threat isn't the only presidential action set to hit this country. Trump has already issued a slew of executive orders that could have big impacts here at home, declaring, for example, an energy emergency and pulling out of the International Paris Climate Agreement. Stephen Guilbeault is the federal environment minister. Hi, Minister Guilbeault. Good to see you again. Thank you for making the time.
My pleasure, Vashi.
I have a number of questions on sort of the wider implications of some of the executive orders around the environment from President Trump, but I did want to start off on your endorsement of Mark Carney in the leadership race. Every single candidate is either backing off increasing the carbon tax, the consumer portion of it, or getting rid of it altogether, including your chosen candidate. Now, you sound like you'd be okay with that. All of a sudden yesterday I was listening to your comments, and I remember doing multiple interviews with you in which you told me that politicians who cave into pressure on the carbon tax don't care about climate change. How can you now be one of them?
I mean, what I've said, Vashi, is that the consumer component of our carbon pricing system is a good policy. And it's a policy that works. It is helping us reduce emissions. It is putting more money in people's pocket for the majority of Canadians where the federal system applies. But at the same time, I'm forced to recognize that largely due to Pierre Poilievre's campaign to frankly lie and misguide Canadians, it has become very unpopular. And what I've also said is that our climate plan doesn't rest on one single measure. There's about 100 measures that we've put out the door in the last few years that are helping us reduce our pollution like never before in the history of the country. In fact, we've never seen our pollution levels go down while the economy is going up. Never happened before. And I mean, of course, I would like for the consumer component of pricing to continue moving forward. But the reality is that it's not supported by the NDP. Even so, environmental organizations are telling me, listen, Minister, it's too unpopular. And we have other tools. Well, I mean, we obviously have the industrial component of carbon pricing, which gives us about 3 times more pollution reduction than the consumer one. So we have other tools at our disposals to continue fighting climate change. And Mr. Carney's been very clear. He said, you know, if we want to remove something from the equation in terms of fighting for climate change, we have to be able to put something else or use other tools that we have and beef them up to make sure that in the end, we're not losing ground on fighting climate change in Canada.
And I guess
So it's exactly as Vashi says. It's crazy when their party is just doing as bad as the NDP and getting destroyed by the Conservatives, and an election is inbound, how fast they backtrack on the hill that they were going to die on, which was the carbon tax. For 9 years, they've kept this stupid tax in, saying without it, Canada's going to burn to the ground, or that it puts more money in Canadians' pockets than they put into the system, which the parliamentary budget officer has proven to be incorrect multiple times. And apparently Guilbeault is still reiterating that lie. And yet, now they're going to scrap it. But Guilbeault still has the gonads to come out and say that, oh, the reason why they're scrapping it is because Pierre Poilievre tricked all of us stupid Canadians who don't know that the carbon tax is actually really, really good for us. And we're just too foolish to see how good a consumer carbon tax is.
though, it's confusing to me because I remember putting that exact point to you again on multiple occasions, that there were progressive allies of yours who were saying that there were replacements, other tools that could replace the consumer carbon tax. I'll read you exactly what you told me 9 months ago. If there's a measure somewhere that someone can find and point to me that will help us achieve 10% of 2030 targets at no extra cost to consumers lying around under a rock somewhere, someone needs to show it to me because I haven't seen it. Have you seen it now? Because I don't understand what's changed in the interim other than Justin Trudeau leaving.
As I said, I mean, the fact that the leadership candidates have said that they wanted to reconsider the consumer portion of carbon pricing. I mean, I basically have two choices here. I can stay in the party and continue help fighting to protect the environment, fighting climate change, or go pick my bags and go home. And I don't think that's a very viable option for me, especially with the threat of a possible Poilievre election who doesn't even recognize the threat of climate change, who, like Donald Trump, would probably pull us out of the Paris agreements. So my team and I are looking at, okay, well, if we don't have the fuel charge anymore, what else can we do to compensate? And there are possibilities. And Mark Carney has said exactly that. Like if we want to remove something from the equation in terms of our arsenal to fight climate change, then we have to come up with a new measure or use some of the existing measures, but maybe tighten them up a little bit so that they give us more bang for our bucks.
And I would just point out he hasn't detailed any of that to Canadians. And I guess it's on behalf of Canadians who are watching, who are incredibly concerned, as I know you are, about the impacts of climate change, that I ask, are you so sure the Liberal Party will continue to be best positioned? And not vis-a-vis the Conservatives, who, you're right, have detailed nothing and deserve hard questions about that. But just in general, I'm thinking of other things that you have put on the table that you have recently walked back, including, for example, a net zero electricity grid, which was supposed to be 2035 and is now 2050. Jonathan Wilkinson, the energy minister, a few weeks ago told me that if he were still running for leader, he would have rethought the emissions cap, for goodness sakes. I don't even know if the candidates are wedded to the emissions cap on oil and gas anymore. Can you really look at Canadians who are concerned, deeply concerned about the climate crisis and say the Liberal Party is going to reach the targets that the government has set out? Because nobody is detailing how they're going to do that, and they're abandoning the stuff you've put in place.
Well, I beg to differ on the clean electricity regulations, because we never assumed that those regulations would enable the Canadian grid to be carbon neutral by 2035, because the regulations only enter into force in 2035. So we're giving public utilities, electricity companies across the country 10 years to prepare for the entry into force of those regulations. So it's impossible, if the regulations comes in place in 2035, that we would go from a grid that is emitting to a grid that is carbon neutral the same year. That's just physically impossible. So we're not backing down on that. In fact, although not a lot of people are talking about it, the clean electricity regulation is one of the most material things we've done to tackle emissions in this country. It is millions of tons of CO2 that will never make it to the atmosphere because of those regulations. It means a cleaner grid. It means a grid also that will become more affordable over time for Canadians. And it means jobs all across the country in the renewable energy sector. In terms of the cap on oil and gas emissions, I mean,
I'm just going to take a quick stop there. And no, it won't make it cheaper for Canadians. We saw this when the Liberal Party was in Ontario. And in the comments, if anybody's from Ontario, let me know if this is correct. But when the Liberal Party was in power and imposed mandates on solar power and wind power, the cost of electricity skyrocketed. And that's why they were voted out and the Ford government was voted in. And we've seen this actually in other countries too. We've seen this in Germany, where they restricted oil and they increased wind. And during the winter, the cost of electricity skyrocketed. We have also seen this in Mexico, where they implemented solar panels in some of their smaller islands, and the cost of electricity increased so much, they had to go back to cooking with wood. So what Guilbeault is saying about this, I don't know, clean energy enforcement regulation is just wrong. Now, if they implemented it in a way that they're going to use nuclear energy, then that's a whole different scenario there. If they're going to be building nuclear power plants and using that as clean energy, then yes, electricity and everything will go down for Canadians. But I don't even have to look it up online to know that that's not what the Liberals are talking about. The Liberals aren't really even looking into nuclear. It's wind, it's solar, and they tout carbon capture every once in a while, but not really. Only when it's convenient, and taxes, pretty much. That's what they tout.
I continue to believe that it is a good piece of policy, and that for a number of reasons. I mean, every sector should do their fair share when it comes to reducing their pollution, and certainly the oil and gas sector should do that as well. And I have spoken with Mark Carney about that, and he shares my belief on that. So we are committed to continue moving forward with that.
But that's Mark Carney. I don't know where, nobody else has come out and said anything. And I have the energy minister who on multiple occasions came on this program to defend that cap, now all of a sudden saying there could be other tools. I think, again, I'm coming at it from perspective of people who are worried about climate, who you and your colleagues defended a series of policies for a number of years and now all of a sudden are no longer wedded to them in the same way. Why should they trust you on this file?
Well, because we're the first government in the history of Canada who've taken climate change seriously. We're the first government in the history of Canada that has deployed a credible plan to fight our climate pollution. And we're the first government in the history of Canada that have results to show for it. Do we need to do more? Absolutely. And I'm sorry, Vashi, I often watch your shows. I missed it when Minister Wilkinson was there. I was talking with him yesterday about the emissions cap for the oil and gas sector. And what he told me is that he's still on board with moving forward with that regulation.
Maybe because he decided not to run. It was a few days before he had made that decision. I did want to ask you about sort of.
Actually, that's not true. The first industrial carbon tax that was created in Canada was done under the Harper government in 2008. So the Liberal Party isn't the first party in Canada that has taken this seriously. And Canada has always taken this sort of stuff seriously. That's why we have a beautiful country like we do now.
Sort of the broader picture outside of just Canada and the executive orders that we've heard from President Trump, ranging from everything from withdrawing from Paris climate to declaring an energy emergency, and in his inauguration speech talking about drill, baby, drill. I looked also, for example, you're supporting Mark Carney. He had been at the helm of this net zero banking initiative. 4 of Canada's big banks have now withdrawn from it, following the lead of a number of big banks in the United States. Why are people who care a lot about the climate emergency losing the argument right now? And what do you think the bigger impact of that is?
So clearly, it's no surprises that the Trump presidency and his administration would pull out of the Paris Agreement. They've done it the first time in 2016. We anticipated that they were going to do it again. But when they did it the first time, the international community continued marching on with the fight against climate change. And we have, again, we're not moving fast enough, but globally emissions are coming down. And it is anticipated that global pollution levels will peak in the coming years, could even be next year. And of course, the president can say, drill, baby, drill. But the reality of the oil and gas sector is that, yes, there is a part of the equation is the offer, how much you can produce, but the other part of the equation is demand. And according to the International Energy Agency, which is a very credible international organization on these issues, demand for oil is going to peak in the coming 2, maybe 3 years. And by 2030, will be reduced by about 6%, maybe 5 or 6%. So the world is heading towards clean tech. The world is heading towards renewable energy. The world is heading towards electrification of transportation. Not everywhere at the same pace, but it is happening everywhere around the world. And so you can say, I'm going to produce more and more, but soon there'll be less and less people who say, well, we want your oil, because people are moving towards electricity in the industrial sector, in the building sector, in the transportation sector, which will result in a very near future in a lower demand for oil. And it's not just 5% to 2030, but the curve continues to go down past 2030 for less and less demand for oil, coal, and even gas demand in the coming years.
Just very quickly.
Okay, so I don't know where Guilbeault is getting that information about global markets are not going to be using oil and gas after 2030, because every chart and saying it peaks 2 years from now, because every chart that I see, and I'll put them up here, does not say that, and it only goes until 2030. And on the charts, you can see that it does peak, it does peak at 2030, but like I said, all the charts end then. And how can you anticipate past 5 years from now? Things change so often. There could be a major war, and then oil just spikes immensely for a couple of years. And his thing about total greenhouse gas emissions going down, I got a chart right here, and it has steadily grown since 1850. In the year 2023, it says the world has created 53.82 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions, and I don't see anything indicating that it's going to slow down.
Though, are you so sure that that will be the case, given, for example, something like the EV mandate in the United States? And again, if this were a smaller country in Europe, not the end of the world, but this is the United States. They've just, again, through executive order, removed the EV mandate. Is that electrification of transportation actually going to happen to the degree that you or even the International Energy Agency have analyzed that it will?
Well, obviously, the U.S. federal government removing this regulation will slow the pace of EV adoption in the U.S., but it's not the end of it, because you have about 20, if not 22 U.S. states that have their own EV mandates. California, New York, and a bunch of other. And it's not because the federal government all of a sudden is no longer interested by that they're not interested by that, and they will continue moving forward. I was at the last UN climate meeting where about half of U.S. states were represented by governors, by some of their ministers, saying we still want to work with you fighting climate change. We still want to work with you on electrification. We still want to work with you on transitioning away from fossil fuels. So will it have an impact? Absolutely. Is it the end of the U.S. nation and U.S. society fighting climate change? Absolutely not.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note.
So how about this? How about in Canada, since, it's too cold here for us to really use electric vehicles reliably, how about we make the electric vehicles here and then send them down to those states that have those mandates, like California and any of those other states. I can only assume California, but I'm not going to assume any other state has it. But that's what we should be doing here, so we can get in on this low emissions green phase, even though we can't really use that technology reliably here in Canada ourselves. But he doesn't mention that, of course. And I still haven't heard anything about nuclear energy.
Minister, I appreciate your time as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vashi. Take care.
So, there you go, guys. It seems like the Liberals' new stance is going to be no more consumer carbon tax, because it is way too unpopular. Not because the world, or not because it's making Canadians poorer and sending 2 million more Canadians to the food banks, but because it's just unpopular. But what do you guys think? Is this new stand of the carbon tax gonna help you, gonna swing your vote to the Liberal side and not the Conservatives? Let me know in the comments down below, and Let me know what you think of Guilbeault now. Is this new trend on life helping you warm up to them? Also, if you'd like to donate to the channel, I have a Buy Me a Coffee link down below. Everything donated is go right back to the channel, so no pressure there. And other than that, have a great day.